Okay, we will begin. And welcome to our third week of Dating and Marriage, where we are learning the 7 principles of making marriage work. Last week, we started the first 3 principles. Let's quickly go over that, and then we're going to start with principle number 4. The first one we discussed was creating and enhancing love maps, which is best accomplished by asking what we refer to as open-ended questions. It's like the exact opposite of what you see sometimes in a congressional hearing or on TV when they're like trying to press with the question to get to an answer, right? No, I'm trying to not press you in a direction and you let me know which direction, right? Quite the reverse. That was number 1. Number 2 was nurture fondness and admiration, create an environment of gratitude, not flattery. Not that I'm biased, or maybe I am, but if I had to say which one I think is the most powerful, it's probably number 2, if I had to guess. It's just a guess. I could be wrong, but that's what I would say. Number 3 was turning towards, all right, maybe it's a tie between 2 and 3, but turning towards bids and not turning away, and God forbid to ever turn against, to say I'm not interested in the weather, as we used as our example last week. Sorry, I couldn't think of a better example, but be it as it may, turning towards, we said some very interesting statistics. The couples that could not be married for more than 5 years only turned toward bids 30% of the time. Their counterparts who were happily married for more than 5 years, over 70% of the time. Okay, number 4 for this week. It's going to come maybe or perhaps as a shock, but I'll tell you what the Gottmans have as principle number 4. Let your partner, spouse, influence you. Influence. Now, growing up, our parents said, have good friends, have bad friends, don't have bad friends, because friends influence you, right? And the truth be told, influence is a neutral force. Influence could be good. It could also be bad, right? Having good friends, right? In Pirkei Avos, Ethics of Our Fathers, we are told, harchek mishachin ra, distance yourself from a bad neighbor, and make sure to have for yourself a good neighbor, because neighbors are influential. So influence is a neutral force. In this case, influence may also be a neutral force, but it's a very important aspect of being able to live with someone to allow the influence. Now, we're gonna say at the onset, this does not mean, right? Sometimes when people take a new concept, they take it to the extreme. This does not mean you lose, or a person loses in their individuality. This does not mean they relinquish all their tastes and preferences. What it does mean is they allow someone to come into their life and perhaps occasionally, or not so occasionally, have things be changed, tweaked, altered, swapped, substituted, etc. We're going to give examples in a second, but that's the general idea, is allowing influence. Don't constantly have a guard up to remain the person who I am. Okay. I'm going to read a very interesting quote from the Gottmans, and this will bring this to a little bit to perhaps a more relatable level, and then we're going to give a case, an example in just a second. So here's their quote. Our study did not find men should give up all their personal power and let their wives rule their lives. But what we did find, the happiest, most stable marriages in the long run were those in which the husband did not resist sharing power and decision-making with their wife, right? So allowing someone else, that's their quote. Now, let me give you an example over here. And this is from the Gottmans themselves, from their book. Here's the example that they give, okay? Here we go. Jeremy was considering buying a used Honda. The car seemed like a great deal since the seller Phil had only bought it a month ago and was offering a large discount because he was being transferred overseas. Jeremy loved this car, the car's handling and power, not to mention the state-of-the-art sound system. But before doing a deal, he wanted a mechanic to check the car, right? This brand new car over here. Why, said Phil, it's really brand new. It only has 300 miles and you get the manufacturer's warranty, right? True, said Jeremy, but I promised my wife I wouldn't buy a car without having it inspected first. Phil gave Jeremy a withering look. You let your wife tell you what to do, he asked. Sure, said Jeremy. Don't you? Well, no, I don't. Or didn't. I'm divorced, said Phil. Well, Jeremy chuckled, maybe that's why. Jeremy had the car checked by his mechanic, and it turned out that the suspension in the system needed a costly repair, so he never bought Phil's car. Okay, we'll let the story continue, right? But what's very interesting is that this is a classic example. Now, it turned out that the car did have a problem and he didn't buy it. And it's not a bad idea to have that as a best practice, regardless of the situation. But put the facts, put that stuff aside for a second. This is a classic case of where a person could say to their spouse, and it could be the wife to the husband to the wife, doesn't really matter here. This car is brand new. I don't need inspection. But I grew up, my father always telling me I need to get a car inspected. Yes, but that's not the case here. And they go back and forth and back and forth, right? That could have been what the road they could, or a person could say, I didn't necessarily feel that it's so necessary, but if that's what makes you more comfortable with, sure. Okay, right? Nothing wrong with saying that. Not sarcastically, just, okay, sure, if it's something that's important to you. Not if it makes you feel good, right? Not that type of, So that's a very, very, very classic example of where someone could have something that's not important to them, it's important to their spouse, and they allow their spouse's concerns to influence their decision-making. Says Gottman, that's principle number 4. Now, of course, since we're looking at this through the Jewish lens, as I say many times, the Torah is the oldest yet most relevant study we could possibly ever have with us. And the Torah tells us, this is in Perek Beis Pasuk Yoches in Bereshis, that's Genesis, chapter 2, verse 18. This is by the first ever couple, Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. So what happens here? So we know that the Almighty Hashem created the world 6 days, 7th day is Shabbat. And then the Almighty created, we know heaven, earth, light, darkness, animals, seas, all that stuff, okay? After that, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, the Almighty said, Lo tov hayos adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. Asa lo ezer kenegdo. The Almighty said, I'm going to make an ezer kenegdo, which means literally a helpmate against him. Whatever that means. Okay? Okay, so the verses continue. Vayitar Hashem Elokim min ha'adama kol chayas hasada. The Almighty created chayas hasada and everything that came with it. And the Almighty, the verse concludes, right? It was a living creature that remained its name, and that ended up becoming Chava, Eve. That's Adam's wife. Okay, and then the story continues. But what I want to focus on over here is a fascinating verse. Lo tov heyos adam levado. It's not good for a man to be alone, comma. As to lo ezer kenegdo, I'm going to make a helpmate corresponding or against him. Rashi, the famous commentary we have probably mentioned before, probably the most famous early commentary, lived from 1040 to 1105, I believe, France. Rashi says, comments on this verse, the following. Ezer Kenegdo, a helpmate corresponding to him. Zacha, if the person merits, like a zachus, a merit. If the person merits, says Rashi, Ezer, then their spouse will be a helpmate. Lo zacha, if they do not merit, in other words, they don't end off with the best. Lo zacha, kenegdo lehilachem, they're always going to be corresponding to them as opposition. If a person merits that their spouse, they merit something proper and worthy, then it's a helpmate. If they do not merit, then it's going to be someone corresponding to them for objection, for, against them. So what we see from here is two fundamental ideas that should change the way we think of marriage for the rest of our lives. That number one, we're talking the best case scenario, of course. Not just I should say that better. Not just the best case scenario, hopefully our case scenario. But number one, a person will never reach their full potential being single. They could become good and perhaps great, but they will not become their greatest. They will not become the best as a single. Lo tov hayos adam levado. The Almighty said to Adam, it's not good for you. You're not going to be the best. And what's number two? Number two is equally powerful, perhaps even more. The second thing that the Almighty said is that we need someone who corresponds to you, someone who is a little. Keneged in Hebrew can mean not just correspond, but also means opposite to you, different than you. The Torah prohibits a person from marrying their immediate family. The Torah prohibits a person from a brother marrying a sister. The person needs to be not from their immediate family, right? Which is very consistent with this idea, not just on a law, but also on a philosophical level as well. It has to be Ezer Kenegdo, someone who's helping you because they're opposite than you, not just in gender, but also in the upbringing, in the style, in the preferences, all these different things that a person may think, oh, these things get in the way, but really what the Torah says is no, they help you. Opposition could help you. Let's give an example for this. If I want to work out, I want to lift. If I want to strengthen muscles, I lift weights. Right. So I have this. Right. I have this. Right. We'll call this is my weight over here. Right. If I want to do curls, right, I lift weight. Okay. So pretend this is 20 pounds. Okay. Right. Not 0.2 ounces, but 20 pounds. Okay. There we go. Right. Flex. Okay. So this right here. Now, if you think about it, for me to build muscle, I'm not trying to put something on my muscle. I have to put something holding back the muscle. For me to gain strength and build muscle, I have to pick up something that weighs my arm down, nevertheless pick it up. And then there's this whole effect that it rips a little bit of the tissue, and then with time, rest, sleep, and healthy diet, the muscle will come back stronger. But what I'm focusing on is that muscle only gets built with opposition against it. And what the Torah is telling us is it's very much the same thing with personal development and character development, specifically in our marriages. Having someone who's an Ezer Kenegdo, someone who's opposite us, right, has differences than us, right? Ezer will help us, right? Not having the same. All right, is that clear? Any questions? Feel free to unmute or ask away. All right. Number 5. Principle number 5. All right, so this is where it gets fun. because I guarantee you no one saw this coming. Not problem. Principle number 5. Here it is. Solve your solvable problems. Oh, as opposed to solving non-solvable problems? Well, Gottmans have concluded with their research that there are 2 types of problems. Meaning to say every single conflict, every single problem that comes up in a relationship falls into either 2 categories: solvable or perpetual. Okay? What they found is that they could have a couple, and this is fascinating. What they found is that they could have a couple that has some sort of argument, conflict, problem, and they're arguing it 4 months into their marriage. And then they can follow up with the couple 4 years later, and they're having the same exact argument, same exact problem. Not like 4 years have passed, but like 4 minutes have passed. It's the same exact problem, the same exact lines, and literally as if no time has passed in between. Gottman says it's because they are dealing with a perpetual problem that they're treating like a solvable problem. And for people to be successful managing conflict, they have to be able to decipher between the 2. All right, it's fascinating stuff. And let's put the cherry on top right now. I hate to say this, everybody, but 69% of marital conflicts, according to the Gottmans, are perpetual problems. They ain't going away. Sorry to bust the bubble. But that is what they have concluded. 69% of conflicts are not going away. We said last week or 2 weeks ago with the 6 areas that every couple has conflict over, that it's not about not having conflict. It's inevitable. There will be different needs and different desires in different situations. It's about managing it. One of the ways we're going to be managing it is recognizing what is solvable and what is perpetual. Okay, so what are those 2 things? What's an example of a solvable? How do you decipher? What's an example of perpetual? How do you decipher? And how do you treat each one respectively? For that, it's 120 years of work, but we will try to do the best we can. We do what we do tonight. I will say that we'll discuss. We will discuss how they do that, but I will just say, for the record, like I did last week and 2 weeks ago, this is not a one-time thing. I graduated school and now I don't have to go back ever again. Great. That's for your diploma. That's not for this stuff. This stuff is always reviewed, always revisited, and practiced again and again. Okay, so what are the signs of what we will call a perpetual problem? Okay, so let me quote for you over here from the Gottmans. Just give me a second as I maneuver things over here. Okay, so this is how the Gottmans try to explain telling the difference. Quote, if you and your spouse are entrenched in conflict, it may not be obvious which of the 2 types of disagreement you are having, gridlock or solvable, right? Perpetual gridlock or solvable. One way to identify solvable problems is that they seem less painful, gut-wrenching, or intense than perpetual gridlock ones. That's because when you argue over a solvable problem, your focus is only on a particular dilemma or situation. There is no underlying conflict that's fueling your disputes. Okay, you get that? Usually, a solvable problem is something just it's about practicalities. This goes against this. It's a schedule conflict. That's a great example. An example that they give later on. Here's a good one. This gives you a great idea. Cliff and Lynn agree that it's Cliff's job to take out the kitchen trash every evening after dinner. But lately, Cliff has been so distracted by a big deadline looming at work that he forgets. Either Lynn ends up throwing out the garbage herself, or the trash just sits there. By morning, the apartment smells like a city dump, and Lynn is in a rage. Guess what? That's a solvable problem. You know why? Because he's forgetting, because he's a lot of work, right? Once that work is over, he will not be too busy. He will remember to do it on his own, and there goes the problem. That's a solvable problem, right? So what their next principle is understanding what is solvable and what is not solvable. There are certain things which are not solvable. Here's an example. He wants 1 kid or no kids, and she wants 5 kids. That's a perpetual problem. It ain't going away. And a person has the choice to either accept, to work with it, or either, probably would have been best to discuss this before they got married, but assuming they didn't, just for the example's sake, okay, for the sake of this conversation, for the idea to convey this over here, they did not discuss it, the person will have a choice. I will either accept, live, and overcome it. And yes, it may, get me a little upset here and there, but I'll learn how to deal with that and have a focus on dealing with that. Or just say, maybe this relationship was not meant to be long-term or something. I don't know, whatever, right? They will have that choice, okay? Usually things of that level, that nature, are that important to a person. They should be discussing, not necessarily early dating, but somewhere in the middle, near engagement time, for sure. Something of, life-changing status. But that's an example of a perpetual problem that you could talk and argue, just have enough of the argument and put it on pause. 3 months pass, 3 years pass, and you're still arguing however often you are, and it's never changing. Someone wants something and someone wants something else, and the facts on the ground are not changing. Now, if they do change and it becomes a solvable problem, great, God bless you. But that may not happen. There are certain types of problems that will not be resolved on their own. Says Gottman, principle number 5, figure out which problems are those, which ones are not those, and the ones that could be solved, follow through and solve. The ones which are not solvable, recognize their perpetual problems, and then we'll get to the next, how to then deal with it without letting it take over your lives. I hope that's clear. That's a lot right there, I understand, but that's pretty key. If anyone has any questions, I understand that was a lot, please fire away. Okay. So how do you deal with perpetual problems? Okay, we just said that if it's not solvable, if it is solvable, solve it. If it's not solvable, it's perpetual, it ain't going away. So how do you deal with it? So a couple things. There are a couple things that a person could do. And I'm going to quote to you what Gottman says about perpetual problems. Fascinating stuff. He says, I found that a robust fondness and admiration system is central to remaining happily married, which is basically saying the more a person is successful on principle number 2, right, they will not be overcome and taken over by perpetual problems. You might recall this was benefit number 2 of people who wrote gratitude letters. Remember that, right? If you don't remember that, I'll read, no, it was the first one of gratitude letters. The first one was someone who is constantly in a mode of gratitude simultaneously will not be, at the same time, will not be thinking negative thoughts, right? Their focus is on positive. This is not a case of good multitasking, and it's very good that a person is not multitasking in this case, right? They're focusing on positive, right? If they're in a half full mode, they're not also thinking at the same time it's half empty, right? So Gottman's there's a few things, and it's, a lot of them, and each one is very important. But the first one is, the more a person is focusing on fondness and admiration, right, the less perpetual problems will be bothering them. And like we said before, gratitude letters work even if you don't send them. It's great to send them too, by the way. But the point is that in a person's own head, the more they're thinking more positive, they will not be able to have at the same time negative emotions. And it's a skill that's developed. I said this a couple weeks ago, and I really mean it. I'm not as thankful as I should be for the fact that we could walk and talk and eat and sleep and do all the daily things that we could do. And it's only until you hear of another story, a situation, a relative, a friend, or a friend of a relative, or a relative of a friend, and you visit someone in the hospital, blah, 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 and you see, oh my gosh, that's so sad, right? If we were to really be thankful of all these daily activities that we could do with relative ease, right? A lot of the rainy days would be a lot less rainy, even if it was to someone else a lot more negative. That's number 1. Okay? That's the first thing a person could do with that. I actually want to share with you how powerful this could really be. There's a concept in Judaism that's called ahava mekalkeles es hashura. I'll say that again. I know that was a lot of 3 long, hard to pronounce words. Ahava, which is easy. Love. Mekalkeles es hashura. 4 words, actually. The love could sometimes divert and make crooked that which is straight, which is basically another way of saying is that love is a very powerful emotion, and it can therefore construe things which should be one way, but then take it another way. I'll give you an example, okay? It's a little bit of a silly example, but it brings out this point, and bear with my very silly example. But I was watching a Holocaust video a couple months ago. Really sad, very sad. It was around the Yom HaShoah time, and we were doing some Holocaust studies for some of my public school students here in Bexley. And we had Mark Ebner, whose father was Murray Ebner, survived Auschwitz, and we had a video documentary, and a very, very sad story, but again, showed a lot of resilience. Okay. So I was watching some of the stuff, and wow, it's just unbelievable. Every time every time you think about what our fellow Jews went through in Nazi Germany, it's just incredible. It's that people could actually be in such terrible situations. So I remember that day, I was with my son and my at the time, was a little 3-year-old. He wants a cookie, he wants a candy bar, whatever it was. I'm like, sweetie, whatever you want. I just watched a Holocaust video. I'm so happy, yet you're healthy, safe, and alive. Whatever you want. Yeah, you want that? Okay, take the whole shelf, right? Right? I had just such a love for him at that moment, right? I just couldn't say no. Like, please, I'm so happy you're here, right? Now, it's very nice that, that I love him so much, but if you were to objectively think about it, he doesn't do so well with sugar, bedtime's in a couple hours, maybe you have to earn it, right? You can think of all these more rational and logical things. But I was in a state of this, what we're calling ahava mekalkeles es hashura, that love could sometimes divert from that which is straight, and it has its advantages. there are times where it's very, very helpful, where a person wants something to be a little diverted from its truth because of the outpour of love, because it will help the overall relationship. And when there is an opportunity of gridlock because of a perpetual problem, the more a person will be able to give and invest and love and love and love 10 times over, again, the less those perpetual problems. We're not getting rid of them, but we could minimize the gridlock that is born out of them. So one way is to have a high level of gratitude, right? Again, focusing on other things, because when you are focusing half full, half empty is not in existence. And the second thing is invest and become a higher level of a giver, and then those perpetual problems will also bother you less. You will many times find parents who have a child that is of special needs, whatever the special needs are, they have a certain relationship and love for that child which supersedes the other children. And the answer is simple, because they are investing a tremendous amount more into the child. To see the flip side of that, sometimes those other children suffer as a result from I don't want to say lack of love, but less love, so to speak, than that other sibling, right? All right, we're not getting into that right now. But for our conversation, we see is that even though there's a perpetual problem, right? This person is compromised, whatever that compromise might be, right? And yet, how much is it bothering the parent? Well, if they invest in the child and give to the child and love the child, right? To the contrary, now they have a higher level of love and the relationship's even better. Again, we're not getting rid of the perpetual problem, but we're managing it ever so successfully. Okay? So principle number 5 is solve your solvable problems. Recognize that some will not be solvable. Principle number 6 is overcome gridlock, which is really a sister principle of principle number 5. If one is solving their solvable problems and recognizing what the perpetual problems, the next question will be, well, then how do I do that and not fall into gridlock? So I'm going to give you 4 things, 4 signs of gridlock, and then perhaps a couple, best practices over here that could help with that. Signs of gridlock are when this conversation, this argument has happened again and again without resolution. That's one sign of gridlock. Number 2, neither spouse can address the issue with humor or empathy. Another sign of gridlock. It's becoming increasingly polarizing. Okay. And number 4, compromise seems impossible because it means giving up so much. Okay. Those are 4 signs of gridlock, and the best would be to not get there. All right. That's when a person knows they're in a territory that will not be good for them. So I want to share with you now. Let's go find this. Bear with me, please. About gridlock. Okay. Listen to this from Gottman. As with most difficulties, the best approach to coping with gridlock is to avoid it in the first place. Fortunately, the more adept you become at following the other 6 principles, the less likely you are to gridlock over intractable differences. As you come to know and trust each other, you will find that disagreements that once would have overwhelmed you are more easily handled, especially if you make uses of the exercises that they provide, like thinking of what you could be thankful and fond of, and writing those lists, and just contemplating, by yourself, all those things. Okay? Listen to this. When couples are able to sidestep gridlock, they come to treat their perpetual problems as they would as some allergy or bad back pain. They know the difficulty won't ever go away, but they manage to keep it from overwhelming their life altogether. Of course, when you're in the midst of gridlock, it may seem impossible that you can manage the conflict as readily as, say, a trick knee, but you can do it. Remember that you don't have to solve the problem to get past gridlock. Neither of you has to give in or lose. Listen to the punchline. The goal is to be able to acknowledge and discuss the issue without hurting each other. Okay, so now with that in mind, let's get into some best practices. Number one, let me just find it over here. So I have a lot of notes for tonight. The first one is what we'll call soft startup. How a person starts the conversation. No snapping, yelling, right? A soft startup, okay? Number two, use effective use of repair attempts, right? I'll give you an example. It would be best for me, or it sometimes bothers me, instead of you are, you did, okay? Put it on you, all right? We call that effective use of repair attempts. Number three, and this might be something new to people, but it's ever so important. Monitor physiology during tense moments for warning signs of flooding, right? You know, you're shaking, you're getting at it, right? How you know, or are you composed? Are you relaxed? Okay, the world's not coming to an end, contrary to a voice in our heads belief sometimes. And number four, learn how to compromise, right? How about that? Number five, become more tolerant of each other's imperfections. I remind this to myself all the time, not just in this area, but all the time, all over. I'm not a perfect human being. I never will be. I have my fair share of mistakes. And if I want other people to tolerate my mistakes, how about I set an example and tolerate other people's mistakes? Okay? Not a bad thing to remind ourselves once in a while, or more than that. Okay. So that's principle number 6, overcoming gridlock. Before we go to principle number 7, I want to share with you a very interesting Torah thought. A person, when they move into a house, when they live in a home, right? We have a mezuzah on our doorpost. The mezuzah says the famous words Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, God is one. He's our God. He is one. Then it has the first paragraph of the Ahafta. The Ahafta is Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha. Right, person to love Hashem. Right, so we put that by the doorpost. Right, pretend this is a mezuzah for a second. So this mezuzah that we put on the doorpost on the right side, you'll notice that it's slanted. You'll notice that every mezuzah 2/3 of the way up, it's slanted. Why is it slanted? I think it looks prettier when it's straight. The reason it's slanted is because really there's a machlokas, there's a debate amongst the sages, the early rabbis from hundreds or probably even thousands of years ago. What is the way for a person to place a mezuzah? Is it vertical or horizontal? Or as I used to remember in school, hot dog or hamburger? Okay, I'm just kidding. But right, so there was a debate, a machlokas amongst our sages. Okay, and the bottom line halacha practice is that, well, it's not straight or vertical or horizontal, rather it's slanted. And what's fascinating is usually in halacha, that's not the way we go. Usually there are rules of which opinion we follow for example, between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, we usually follow the opinion of Hillel. When it comes to Abaye and Rava, we usually go with Rava, except for 6 times, different discussion for a different time. There are usually, we have certain traditions that we follow certain people. Here, when you're doing the slanted version, you're getting neither, right? At least if you were to pick one, okay, 50% chance I'm getting it right. Here's 100% chance you're not getting it right. So why is it slanted? So there's a beautiful explanation is that when you're trying to build a home, each one has to be able to give in and meet in the middle, okay? Beautiful thought. When you're building a home that there will be harmony, a home that there will be a family, a home of where we're caring and giving and loving, we have to be able to give from ourselves and meet someone at a place where we weren't before. And that's why a mezuzah on every single doorpost for a house, for eternity in every Jewish home is going to be slanted. Principle number 7 is to create shared meaning. What does that mean? Create shared meaning. So the answer to that is for a person to be able to spend time and dream together as a couple, what their hopes are, what their aspirations, what would they like to do, be it with their family, their community, their religion, their hobbies, the small stuff or the big stuff. Do we have a shared meaning that we could focus, that will keep a high level of glue together, that we could always talk about hope, bring hope to ourselves, dream about? Having that shared meaning of what does it mean for you to have this, and do we share in a certain value, right? Having shared meaning and values is Gottman's 7 principle, which is very easy to understand. It's actually what I would have put as number 1, because like how, but he calls it number 7, which is okay. He's the doctor, I'm not. But nevertheless, that's what their 7th principle is. So to quickly review, and then we're going to get into the 4 stuff that we talked about, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. If you guys want to leave, it's fine with me. But that's the things that they determine and they're able to predict divorce with. But the 7 principles are, see if I can do it by heart, is enhanced love maps, create nurture fondness and admiration, turn towards bids was number 3. Number 4 was problems, right? I hope, right? Number 4 was, hope you don't mind if I look at my notes. Sorry, let your partner influence you. Thank you. Number 4 was influence. Number 5 was solve solvable problems, recognizing the difference between solvable and perpetual. Number 6 was overcoming gridlock, right? And not getting there in the first place if possible. And number 7 was to create shared meaning. Okay. Now, what are the 4, what Gottman calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse? And we'll try to quickly do that, and we'll pick it up next week. So the 4 things are, they are, number 1 is criticism, to be critical and to criticize a spouse. Number 2 is defensiveness. Number 3 is contempt. And number 4 is stonewalling, right? Now, truth be told, every single one of us, since we're human beings, probably have very little of this occasionally, not so occasionally. Or maybe not us, but most of our friends do. Okay, how about that? But let's go through each one at a time. When someone criticizes, right, they chose a path of dealing with the issue, putting someone else down, whereas a complaint would have been focused on the issue, not the person. Get the difference? Successful couples don't focus on the person, they focus on the issue. And the unsuccessful, they chose the path which puts the other person down. So the first way they do that is criticism. Number 2 is defensiveness, okay? They get defensive and not own up to the issue. Now, we all get defensive. We all get defensive. I'll tell you something funny. It happened to me at work earlier this week. A big issue came up, and I probably could have handled it a little bit better. Someone came over to me about it, and I knew I had to own up to it. I just was really not in the mood to own up to it at the time. So I said, can we please talk about this later? And we did. And then I was able to own up to it. I was in a better mood then, right? But this was literally happened earlier this week. Getting overly defensive, right, is there, because what is that doing? that is basically not acknowledging the other person, that we are in a certain level above them and above that and superior to that. Now, time out for a second. Let's just come to a certain understanding and realization, which will help us not be so defensive. Just because we made a mistake does not mean that we are a bad person. To the contrary, bad people cannot admit mistakes. Good people are able to make mistakes and then own mistakes, right? They become a master repairman. Okay, how about that? Successful people become master repairmen. So there's nothing wrong, and perhaps sometimes it's very good to be able to say, you know, you are right. I was wrong. I made a mistake. I am not a mistake. I could sometimes make mistakes. Big difference. Usually when people get overly defensive, it's because they're conflating the two. And then they see themselves as a mistake instead of a good person, right? We all believe that we have a neshama inside of us that comes from God, right? This is in my, maybe I could give this talk at a different time on self-esteem, but there are really two parts to self-esteem. What I call pre-esteem and post-esteem are the two parts that make up self-esteem. Pre-esteem is that I was created the image of God. I'm inherently possessing good within me, the soul of God that we all have. And then my next thing is what I do with it, right? But what I want to focus on is that from the mere fact that every single one of us here tonight and everyone else has a soul, a neshama, a part of God within us, we are all inherently people with good in us. Making a mistake does not undo that. We are still good people that could make a mistake. When people get overly defensive, they are forgetting that, and they're not being mindful that they are a good person that could sometimes make a mistake. They don't own up to it, and then by not acknowledging the other person, right, they portray a level of I'm above you, superior, inferior, etc. So that's the second. That's number two. Number three is contempt. It's like when they're in a higher place, when they're always correcting even small things, like what Gottman says, even like the small stuff like grammar or spelling, like they're always correcting. They can't just, let it, because they're always, they see as above, right? They are superior, and they'll say things like, please get this right, right? If you're talking like that, you just leave out please for the same price, right? But nevertheless, they see themselves in a certain pedestal. And number four, stonewalling, which is basically just ignoring, okay? Like you don't even exist. Now, I'm going to tell you something fascinating. Now, it sounds like, who would ever stonewall, right? So listen to this. This is fascinating stuff. This is why I love the research, love the data. I think you're going to like this. Stonewalling, not giving signals that they're listening, happens 85% of the time that it happens, it's with men. Sorry, guys. What happens is a man's heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute. The brain will then, the brain will secrete adrenaline, and they can't think straight. And when a person's mind is moving so fast, they can't think straight, what they'll do is then just shut down and not respond at all, which is not because they don't think the other person exists, just because they can't keep up with themselves, okay? Which then, right, and the woman is thinking, what? You don't answer me? And then her brain starts to race over 100 beats per second, and then she can't think straight, and then she shuts down, and the problem just spirals. I love this stuff, okay? The problem will just, will literally just go out. So the best thing a person could do was what we call self-awareness, and just say to themselves, okay, you know what? I realize that I don't have it all together right now. It's really important that we talk. We do it in an hour or 20 minutes, a half hour, right? Just like, have that like pocket sentence, hopefully you'll never need to use it, but just in case, or not for you or a friend, right? Needs that, just like, okay, this is a really important issue. I really want to discuss it. I'm going to even write it down, put a reminder on my phone or whatever. Right? Who writes things down today, right? I'll put it on my phone and let's discuss it, put an alarm in an hour. Okay, and I'm going to deal with it much better then than I would if it were now, right? You're not stonewalling now because you told the other person, right, your spouse, you told the other person that I'm not responding because I don't want to answer you. It's because I want to help you, and now's not the time to help. Big, big difference, okay? But what Gottman sees is that the people who fall short in these 4 areas consecutively, right? They critique instead of they are critical of the person instead of complaining about the thing, right? They get overly defensive. They have a high level of contempt. They feel superior. And number 4, they stonewall. Those 4 people, they believe, will not be able, if they have a certain level of that, they will not be able to live for more than 5 years. And out of the thousands and thousands and thousands of couples that they have met and studied and stayed with, they were able to predict with over 90% accuracy who would be able to figure it out, who would be able to stick together and who would not, based on those 4 things. So those are the 4 don't do's, but it's what you find as the common thread between them is what we discussed before: ahava and kavod. Ahava is love, which we said comes from the ahava comes from hav, which means to give, and kavod, which the root, the shorish of that word is kaved, which means substance, giving them something, not putting them down, but raising them up. They all share this common thread of a lack of kavod, a lack of respect. Every single conflict in marriage will always have this element of a perceived lack of respect. Just to go back to our 5th and 6th principle over here, perpetual versus solvable problems. Remember, one of the signs to detect a perpetual problem, right, is that it's not relative to that one-time thing, like taking out the garbage. It's someone who just, I don't know, pick whatever example you want to do. Whenever they drive, they I don't know what, they don't follow instructions. Okay. Yeah, I'll figure it out. I don't need to put on my GPS. I don't need to put on Waze. I don't need Google Maps. Yeah, I'll figure it out. I know how to read signs, don't you? Right. So one of those types of people, right? And that's just the way they drive, right? And the person on the passenger seat, like, can you please put on the GPS? It'll save us a few minutes. You'll get it right the first time. And they have this perpetual problem. It's going back and forth, back and forth. And the reason why they know it's perpetual, because, it hurts. It gets you, bubbles, right? Your blood pressure goes up, all these things, right? What's really going on is that the person who's upset thinks they're not putting on Waze, GPS, Google Maps because they don't really care about me. That's what's really going on. And if they really, really, really cared about me, they would be nice enough to take out the dumb phone they have every other second of their life, when we're eating dinner too, unfortunately. No, I'm just kidding, right? And they would be able to put it on the right address and then get to the right place because they care about me, right? And what we're saying is, no, if it's a perpetual problem, it means that their personality or whatever it is just not like that. What is obvious to you is not obvious. You know what? And objectively speaking, neither one is right. Objectively speaking, I know if you're time sensitive, okay, maybe you are right. But in generalities, right, neither one of them is right. Maybe it is good to learn how to do it on your own. Maybe it's good to not be reliant. You know what? What if your phone is out of battery and you don't have a car charger? Aren't you going to need to know how to drive correctly, right? Maybe it is good. Objectively speaking, neither one is right. The perpetual problem is a real problem when they see it as being personal instead of not personal. That it's, maybe it's not because they don't care about me. Maybe it's because that's just their style. And it's okay, right? And let's learn how to have a soft startup, all those other things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, all right. So that concludes our 7 principles, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Next week is our last week. We'll be discussing romance and passion, bedroom and beyond, some fascinating discussion on Judaism's role and belief in sexuality. A lot of fascinating material, both from through a Jewish lens, how we believe the Torah belief of a couple from a physical, intimate standpoint. That'll be next week at 8 o'clock. That will conclude the series. I will also mention, for those who did not get an email from me, we have a great opportunity this coming Wednesday to hear from a really incredible attorney named Harry Rothenberg, who's a principal at the Rothenberg Law Firm, who is an incredible attorney. He'll be doing an outdoor event with social distancing and all those protocols for those who would like later this week. If you do not hear, or if you want more details, feel free to email me. It'll be in downtown Columbus. And that will conclude. So thank you all for tuning in, and wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Hopefully tomorrow this will be uploaded on YouTube. You can type in Kollel Dating Marriage Part 3. That will be up there. I do encourage, whether it's through listening to this or whatever other means, remembering and revisiting and reviewing these things, always keeping ourselves conscious of that, really, will maximize ourselves and our ability to have successful relationships, successful marriages. And with that, wishing you a wonderful evening and Shabbat Shalom.